Hello, everyone. Welcome again to the Psychology Capstone Showcase. For those of you who are continuing to join us, thank you for staying with us. And for those of you who are joining us now, welcome. Just a quick overview. This next presentation is by one of our undergraduate students who worked on this all semester, coming up with a concept, applying it to a social problem, drawing on all of her psychology background, so that she can come up with solutions that are informed by psychology to this particular social problem. So Olivia Vecchia Vanderhoff's presentation is how human behavior influences the climate crisis. So we will play Olivia's video. She wasn't able to be here, but we certainly didn't want her to be excluded. She had a wonderful presentation that was nominated by her advisor, Dr. Sarah Bielik. And we will open it up for questions and comments after the presentation is over. Thank you.
How Human Behavior Influences Environmental Crisis. Olivia Vecchia Vanderhoff, the Psychology Department at CUNY School of Professional Studies, for Psychology 499 Senior Capstone with Professor Jill Johnson, December 4th, 2022. This problem highlighted in the paper explores the issue of our actions directly causing the destruction of the planet. The matter in question is time-sensitive and must be addressed sternly immediately. The average citizen is at risk of serious adjustment to what normal is, but those in marginalized groups are even more so disproportionately affected. In order to understand how our behavior fuels environmental crisis, we must first look at our environmental behaviors. This is a social psychological form of action that takes into account one's daily impact on the ecosystem. This can be positive or negative. The amount of waste that we create and the energy we use is counted to determine one's environmental behavior. If a person is concerned about the planet, their behavior will be pro-environment. If they are not, their behavior will be anti-environment. This is not black and white. There is a huge gray area of values, as we will discuss. Our values tend to accurately represent how our behaviors impact the planet. Values and their role in decision making. Values play a huge role in our decision making about how we interact with environmental behaviors. Our four main values are egoistic, hedonistic, altruistic, and biospheric. Egoistic values pertain to the cost that one must pay to obtain power, success, and financial freedom. Hedonistic values revolve around how one seeks out pleasure and fun. Altruistic values pay attention to the fact we are all connected and acknowledge our existence as part of a macrocosm with choices influencing other people. Biospheric values are directly geared towards environmental concern. The belief systems that show lack of desire and concern for the environment are egoistic and hedonistic, while altruistic and biospheric values focus on intentional action for the sake of long-term quality of life. These definitions exemplify how the moral decisions of ourselves shape the future of the planet. What is climate change? Climate change is the gradual increase of Earth's temperature that shifts our weather patterns. This human-impacted phenomenon is primarily due to the burning of greenhouse gases. That greenhouse gas effect is the release of water vapor, methane, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and ozone that occurs mainly from burning fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are carbon-rich compounds that take millions of years to make under the Earth's surface from decomposing natural materials. Once these gases are burned and released into the air, they trap heat inside of Earth's atmosphere. The atmosphere's inability to release these emissions cause the Earth's temperature to rise. This alteration is dangerous because of how closely linked climate and weather patterns are. Transportation and electricity. The reliance that we have upon fossil fuels for our daily lives is accurately represented when thinking about transportation and electricity. When we drive cars and keep the lights on, we are actively contributing to global warming. These two networks are the main contributors to releasing carbon dioxide emissions, the number one threat. Current methods of transportation rely upon petroleum products. This crude oil is extracted from the ground and then boiled down until it vaporizes into gasoline. When gasoline is burned, carbon dioxide is released. The main method of electricity production that we use relies upon burning coal. Coal combustion uses steam to turn mechanical energy into electrical energy, releasing carbon dioxide. These elements have finite supplies and are disastrous to the ozone. Although the burning of fossil fuels is the pressing issue, there are plenty of other fingers to point. Food systems. Food systems are a scary and delicate aspect of our environmental behavior. Everyone needs to eat, right? And the food that is readily available isn't raised or grown ethically. The farming and agricultural practices that are commonplace are outdated and arcane. A preferred diet of most involves livestock. This is detrimental to our land because of the amount of forest that is cut down to not only house the cows, pigs, and chickens, but the deforestation that goes on to feed them too. Agricultural incentives to deforest the land is a huge downfall of our farming practices. The methane that is released as manure decomposes is soaked up into the atmosphere, and the nitrous oxide from nitrogen-rich fertilizers is also felt. Mismanagement of land hurts the ecosystems by killing native plants and animals to meet demand for poorly sourced food that gets wasted anyways. It makes no sense to destroy these habitats considering that flora, fauna, and soil absorb carbon dioxide from the air. Excessive waste. Excessive waste is another really unfortunate byproduct of the human condition. Uncontrolled waste is deteriorating the quality of our water and lands at insane speeds. Food waste is one thing that needs to be addressed, but plastic, electronic, textile, and rubber goods are found in extreme quantities all over the globe and in the oceans. Global populations produce over 2 billion tons of waste per year. That is over 440 million pounds. America generates over 12% of the world's municipal waste and isn't even 4% of the populations. Local, state, federal, and international governments must get on the same page about this issue. As of current, there is no ingenuity being adopted that is widely applicable and accepted to deal with disposal methods. Illegal dumping is becoming more common, and as we are desensitized to this, our oceans and valleys are suffering. Garbage and improper disposal has become a public health issue. It is easy to dismiss these regular routines as second nature, because they are. We are so detached from the engineering of the products we use, the systems we rely on, the food we eat, and where our garbage goes, but that doesn't mean it's not happening. The results of unsustainable environmental behaviors are wreaking havoc on the environment everywhere. Droughts, fires, hurricanes, and floods are already in the news at undeniable intervals. The Arctic is warming twice as fast as the rest of the planet, and by 2040 there could be a limited amount of Arctic ice remaining. Melting glaciers and ice caps equate to rising sea levels. This is an imminent threat for coastal communities. It is estimated that by 2050 the ocean will rise over a foot. This puts New York City, Miami, and New Orleans in peril. Biological diversity is disappearing. What is even more upsetting is how the human footprint is eliminating entire species. Our biological diversity is disappearing in forms of cultures, but also animal and fish populations. The fish population in the Atlantic Ocean has declined by over 90% since the 1970s, and it is estimated that by 2100, over 500 mammal species will become extinct. Overfishing and overdevelopment are to thank for the collapse of these various life forms. Biological collapse screams that the Earth is no longer capable of sustaining life. Threats to public health. Transitioning into the threats that these aspects of environmental distress have on public health, climate change is the top public health threat. Death and injury from weather put the elderly and disabled at risk on a regular basis. As the temperatures keep increasing, heat exhaustion and heat stroke target vulnerable populations, such as those with cardiac disease, which is over 7% of the United States. Food and water insecurity are also daunting. Food will become scarce due to once able to be farmed lands becoming uninhabitable, and water will become filled with possible infections because of heat and filth. It is sad, but a decline in mental health is also on the table for the effects that poor environmental behavior has on the world. Climate anxiety is already perpetuating through any sane individual and will continue to become a stressor once we realize how upsetting the impact on public health really will be. How marginalized groups are disproportionately affected. Speaking of distressful events, marginalized groups are disproportionately affected by climate change. Marginalized groups have historically been discriminated against due to belonging and identity. Unfair treatment is linked to race, gender, sexual orientation, and disability. Racism, sexism, homophobia, and ableism is evident in our social, political, and economic landscapes. The intentional placement of colored communities or redlining is a prejudiced practice that contributes to how marginalized groups are at a higher risk of being affected by climate change. Redlining has respect to the New Deal, where access to credit, insurance, and fair interest rates were determined by the neighborhood that a person lived in. Those in predominantly colored neighborhoods were denied these rights by only being allowed to buy homes and receive assistance in neighborhoods that were situated next to industrial areas. Those living next to railroads, waste treatment facilities, and factories are already at risk of developing physical ailments, but with the rising threat of climate change, even more so. The air will only continue to decrease in quality, and the resources will become more scarce for assistance. Environmental racism is indeed a living and breathing force that must be addressed. Possibilities for reducing problem behaviors. Addressing these issues as a whole can be overwhelming and seem micro in a macro world. The possibilities for reducing the problem behaviors have been previously mentioned and include holding people responsible on personal and state levels. For starters, eliminating self-serving denial amongst ourselves and communities is critical. Self-serving denial is the theory that people engage in anti-environmental behavior because they remove the obligation from their decision-making, assuming that their impact doesn't matter. Choosing to believe this transfers the responsibility from pro-environmental behaviors onto larger parties. In order to adjust these unfavorable habits, motivated reasoning can be applied. If we encourage our family and friends through social influence, there is hope on smaller scale levels. Habits such as recycling, carpooling, buying green, using food co-ops, and not buying single-use plastics can be substantial. Another aspect to hone in on for reducing problem behaviors is positive social identity. Social identity weighs in on changing values because they allow people to be proud of the groups which they belong to. For example, investing in energy efficiency is a huge way that greenhouse gases can be reduced. This can be done through energy efficient goods and appliances. If people start to take pride in energy equity by supporting energy efficient appliances, Americans could save 41 billion pounds of gas emissions per year. Relating the idea of building dignity through belonging, it can become part of our identity to protect those who are underserved and at risk through involvement with social and environmental justice organizations. The Environmental Justice Foundation is a great example of organizations that are fighting for environmental security by investigating human rights violations and environmental justice. However, the real hope that is examined comes from legal mandates and policy reforms. On state, local, national, and global levels, legal mandates provide a way to hold the world accountable for preserving the planet. Setting water restrictions, banning products that are toxic and don't decompose, investing in public transportation and greenhouse energy sources will make a serious dent in preserving the planet. Relying on governments to enforce policy changes that reduce greenhouse gas emissions is the real caveat. Only with the help of legal repercussions will we be able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. If we keep a close eye on the G7 or the Group of Seven, which accounts for the world's top economies, to see what they are doing about climate change, the social accountability might be tangible. They are planning a climate group which is aimed to reduce emissions from transportation and electricity. Another attempt at legal administration is the Conference of Parties, or the COP, which is the United Nations Climate Change Conference. The COP includes 198 countries that have vowed to uphold their nationally determined contributions to keeping Earth below 2 degrees Celsius, the determined tipping point of the planet, by committing to the Paris Agreement. There is currently no actual enforcement of these mandates, which is daunting because these modifications are the only way to ensure life will be sustained on Earth. Getting involved. The sole purpose of understanding how human behavior influences environmental crisis is to solve the problems which are causing destruction of the planet. Since this matter is time sensitive, it must be on the forefront of all our minds. Understanding the engineering of the processes that we rely on will help process how hurtful they are to the environment. Learning about climate change and its impacts can move our values from hedonistic and egoistic to altruistic and biospheric. These transitions will dismantle self-serving denial and selfish behavior, promoting an attraction to positive social identity. Motivated reasoning can continue to introduce environmentally friendly behaviors into our daily lives. It is encouraged that the public starts talking about the environmental crisis so influential parties can be held accountable through social suggestions. To take this one step further, electing officials who advocate for policy reform, especially those who understand the correlation between race and environmental justice, will be critical. Although the solution is in our hands, the real opportunity for preservation is in the hands of the government. Let's make environmental behavior the issue to talk about while there is still time to reach justice.
Right. Thank you. Any comments or questions? Feel free to use the raise hand feature and we can unmute you if you have a comment or a question that you want to make outside of the chat. Yeah, Liana says it's so powerful and also daunting. Agreed. But I think there's a little bit of hope that's instilled at the end about things that we can do to help change the trajectory that we're on. I wanted to make a correction. Earlier when I introduced the presentation, I was looking at a different student's presentation, and I said it was Dr. Sarah Bielik that was the student's advisor, and it was actually Dr. Jill Johnson, who is here with us. Olivia couldn't be here, as I mentioned earlier, because she had other responsibilities, but we still wanted to share her presentation. But Dr. Johnson's here. Dr. Johnson, could you maybe mention just the same as Dr. Hansen did with our prior presentation, maybe a little bit about Olivia's journey and, how she came to this topic and, how it evolved over the course of the semester?
Yes, absolutely. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I've been having a few problems with my audio, so thank you. Olivia was wonderful to the extent that, well, I mean, for a number of reasons, but very specifically with this project, she came to me within the first week stating she knew exactly what she wanted to do. And part of this came from the fact that she really wanted to pursue a master's degree where she could help better understand the connections between the psychological impact and why we stay frozen in inaction, and try to build on ways that we can make movement, that things become so overwhelming that it becomes psychologically we get frozen in the inaction. And so week after week, she just said, yes, this section on education is interesting, and I wonder how I can put that toward something with the environment. So it's really been a passion of hers. She does a lot of outdoor, she's involved in a lot of outdoors, and just really wants to somehow find ways to help people approach this in workable bites, so to speak, so that we can make some genuine actions that aren't based in fear.
Great. Thank you for that background and context.
Thank you.
Any other comments or topics? I see a lot going on in the chat. This question is, what advice might the students or their faculty offer to students who might not have a clear vision at the start of the project? Because these students did seem to have a clear vision. I can open it up to Dr. Hansen or Dr. Johnson, and I'm also happy to pitch in my take. And Dr. Isabel Leisha is here as well, the Associate Director of the Psychology Program, who teaches the upper level, the graduate level capstone. And I think the question applies there too. Do any of you want to take that on?
I'll just say really briefly that one of the things when I did have a student that did not know exactly what they wanted to do, I would often ask them about, to look through the list of the topics that would be covered and to say, ask them about where their passions lie, or maybe a pain point that they've experienced where that pain point might be for them. So if it was education, what about that? And then we could begin a conversation that way. So that was my take on it.
Great, thanks. Others? Dr. Alicia, I'll turn it over to you.
Right, thank you. So I 100% agree with Dr. Johnson. Look for topics that inspire you, look for topics that you are passionate about. Also, I think it's a good idea to look to see what's of contemporary relevance. If you notice, both of these topics are very timely and they connect to issues that many of us have thought about and many of us are very interested in. So obviously we're all interested in multiple aspects of the pandemic. We're also very interested in what's going on with the environment. So look to see what's happening in the world. Look at, what's going on in, from a Bronfenbrenner standpoint, your macro system, right? So in the larger environment, what's going on in terms of laws, in terms of social movements, and see if you can figure out how to turn your interest in that into a project. Because, we may all feel passionate about multiple things, but also, it could be that there's just something going on in the world that you're curious about and you want to know more about. And that's, look to see what's out there.